Hey guys, tonight we will peel back the velvet curtain to look directly into the darkest and most chilling corners of history. We're going back about 500 years, to an era where power was measured by who you could touch and what you could touch. This was a place where a nobleman could be executed just for refusing to wipe the king's waist, yet his replacement would become one of the most powerful men in England. An age where beauty was synonymous with poison, where queens used a mixture of white lead and vinegar to plaster their faces, accepting a slow death in exchange for a porcelain white complexion. And if you were an anxious lady, a physician wouldn't give you sedatives, but instead would burn feathers beneath your nose to scare your uterus back into place. This is not a fairy tale retold through romantic television dramas. This is the Tudor court, a labyrinth of superstition, paranoia, and bizarre rituals of survival, where even bathing was considered a deadly act. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as usual, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from, and what time is it for you right now. Drop a comment. It's comforting to know we're all settled in together, despite being thousands of miles apart. Tonight, we'll be slipping back 5 centuries. But I need you to forget everything you think you know about the Tudor court. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Asterisk, asterisk. Strangest hygienic custom number 1, the groom of the stool. On the stage of Tudor power, no title seems more demeaning than groom of the stool, the office responsible for cleansing the king when he used the toilet. It sounds utterly humiliating. Yet in reality, this was the most quietly powerful position in the entire court. The groom of the stool's primary duty was to remain at the king's side whenever His Majesty needed to attend to nature's call, to prepare the cloths, the portable chamber pot, the close stool, and even to wash him personally and meticulously. Whoever held this post enjoyed a wholly private audience with the king, unobserved by any civil or military officers, and even by the Queen. Sir Henry Norris, a close friend of King Henry VIII, once occupied this role and by doing so became the second most powerful man in the realm. Norris knew the king's moods, his health, and even his daily diet in minute detail. Each time the king relieved himself, Norris recorded and analysed the results as if conducting a traditional medical examination. Hard stools signalled the need for a laxative. Overly soft stools revealed an unsuitable diet. Stools tinged greenish. Yellow indicated an excess of bile. And cloudy, foul-smelling urine showed that the kidneys and liver were overburdened. Based on these observations, he would recommend laxatives, dietary adjustments, or additional prayers. The groom of the stool also served as the king's de facto primary physician and kept all such information strictly confidential. Any rumour of the king's bowel mishap leaking out could be considered treason. Thus, the groom lived in velvet and finery, received a luxurious salary, yet literally held the key to every court secret. Whenever the king travelled, his black velvet close stool, trimmed with golden tassels and ribbons, was carried, cleaned, and guarded by a specialised team, functioning like a mobile field clinic. Power in the Tudor court did not derive solely from titles, but from one's ability to cleanse and to conceal secrets behind the chamber veil. What appeared to be the most ignoble position became a springboard to profound influence over policy and in the royal household. In the stillness of night, when the court lay silent, only the soft footfalls of the groom of the stool and the faint clatter of the chamber pot echoed through the corridors during which all manner of political machinations could be whispered. So, when you close your eyes and drift into sleep, imagine yourself in the hushed halls of Hampton Court Palace, where great and small secrets are exchanged with every barely audible shh. And remember, in the Tudor court, true power sometimes resides in the most mundane of daily tasks. Strangest hygienic custom number 2. Analysis of royal stool and urine, diagnosing health through waste. Tudor medicine rested on the ancient belief that the human body contained 4 primary humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and that disease arose from any imbalance among them. Unlike modern diagnostic tools, physicians of the 16th century relied almost exclusively on what the body expelled. Waste became their primary window into the inner workings of the sovereign's health. In the year 1538, The Royal Medical Journal recorded in careful detail that King Henry VIII's stool had a pale green hue. This was immediately interpreted as an excess of bile, prompting the prescription of a potent laxative and a series of prayers to restore humoral equilibrium. Should the king's stool appear abnormally hard, it signified dehydration or a deficiency in fresh vegetables. Physicians would then recommend increased water intake and a diet richer in greens. Conversely, if the stool was overly soft or watery, it suggested an overindulgence in fatty meats, necessitating a reduction in protein and fat. Urine, too, was treated as a diagnostic elixir. A cloudy, viscous, foul-smelling sample indicated that the kidneys and liver were overheated, requiring cooling potions made from herbal infusions and, at times, the application of cold compresses. In contrast, clear yellow urine with only a faint odour was taken as proof that the king's internal humours remained well-balanced. Physicians would taste a drop themselves, an act that, to modern sensibilities, may seem almost unimaginable, before declaring their findings to the court. The process unfolded in strict privacy. The groom of the stool, having cleared the royal chamber pot, would collect samples immediately after the king relieved himself. He then delivered these precious specimens to the appointed court physicians, who analysed colour, consistency and scent in a secluded wing of the palace. Their conclusions were known only to the inner circle of medical attendants and the king himself. Any rumour leaking beyond those walls risked charges of treason, for to reveal royal infirmities was to betray sovereign dignity. Beyond mere medical interest, Tudor nobles recognised the political power inherent in understanding the monarch's most intimate health details. To know the state of the king's humours was to gain influence over court decisions, from foreign policy to domestic appointments. If a faction could persuade the king that his bile was too high, they might advocate for certain remedies or rituals that favoured their own interests. Should they claim his kidneys were cool, they could argue for less strenuous council sessions. In this way, waste analysis became a form of political currency, an unlikely but potent tool for manoeuvring within the labyrinth of Tudor intrigue. The role of the royal waste analyst was thus among the most feared and revered positions at court. Far from being a menial chore, it demanded close access to the king in his most vulnerable moments. The analysts lived in opulence, rewarded with land grants and lavish attire, yet carried the weighty responsibility of safeguarding the king's health, and, by extension, the stability of the realm. Their findings could delay a military campaign, alter a diplomatic mission, or even influence decisions of succession should the king appear weakened. At night, as the corridors of Hampton Court fell silent, only the soft footfalls of the groom of the stool and the gentle clatter of the portable chamber pot broke the hush. In those hushed moments, the subtle alchemy of humoral medicine was performed, and the fate of nations could hinge on the colour of a single sample. So the next time you contemplate the marvels of modern diagnostics, imagine the Tudor court's reliance on the royal stool and urine as definitive health reports. In an age before microscopes or blood tests, waste analysis stood as the kingdom's primary means of medical surveillance. An intimate, even invasive custom that bridged the gap between hygiene and power. Strangest hygienic custom number 3. Avoiding bathing to evade miasma. Avoiding water to flee toxic air. In Tudor medical thought, water was not a source of life, but rather a gateway to death. They believed that when one bathed, water opened the pores of the skin like gates, allowing miasma, polluted air carrying disease, to invade the body. Miasma was held responsible for the plague, the deadly sweating sickness, and a host of other mysterious fevers. For this reason, Tudor monarchs and nobles abstained from bathing to an almost unbelievable degree. King Henry VIII, at the pinnacle of power, might immerse himself once a month at most. Each bathing ceremony was a grand affair. Clouds of incense smoke filled the air as dozens of attendants carried a vessel of boiling water up through the palace to the king's chamber. Hot water, drawn from furnaces below the ground and conducted through pipes, was ladled into a velvet-lined tub, padded with fine linen, so that His Majesty would never come into contact with wood. Servants scattered dried lavender, rosemary, and rose petals into the tub, before lowering the sovereign gently into the fragrant waters, enabling him to bathe while inhaling the pure aroma that dispels impurity. Between these rare immersions, the king was permitted only a rudimentary wipe-down with a cloth soaked in rosewater or vinegar. Each motion was executed with care, touching only the face, neck and hands, the visible parts deemed safe, while the rest of his body, from chest downward, was left to accumulate dust, sweat, and the pungent scent of unwashed skin. It was believed that the natural oils and grime formed a protective armor, preventing miasma from penetrating. Queen Elizabeth II was even more extreme. She bathed once every 3 months, cleansing only her hands and face before meals. This practice astonished the 16th century Italian delegation. She washes her hands before every meal, though none have ever done so before. In lieu of bathing, nobles carried pomanders, small metal spheres filled with cloves, orange peel, and camphor to smell throughout the day. They also chewed caraway and anise seeds to freshen their breath, scarcely adhering to what we would recognize today as dental hygiene. The aristocracy held that only those who avoid frequent washing can keep pollution at bay, and that the mingled odors of sweat and incense signified the wealth required to avoid water altogether. Commoners bathed only when absolutely necessary, believing that excessive bathing would leave their pores open and vulnerable, inviting disease. From palace halls to church aisles, clouds of incense and perfumed smoke created an invisible barrier of protection. At nighttime court entertainments, copious amounts of incense, jasmine blossoms, pomander alloy, and camphor powder would fill the air to mask bodily odors. Every breath was a safety curtain, a way to resist the ever-present fear of miasma. Yet ironically, this very custom was the underlying cause of frequent skin ulcers, the prevalence of leprosy, and infected wounds among the Tudors. Still, they could not relinquish it. He who bathes too often only invites miasma into himself. Therefore, as you prepare for slumber, imagine yourself immersed in a luxuriously scented bath, streaming under a cool shower, simple routines beyond imagining for a Tudor. In their world, bathing was not a means of cleansing but a path to peril, and abstaining from water became the weapon of choice against an invisible foe, miasma. Strangest hygienic custom number 4. Tudor clothing as armor, bulky garments compressing the body. Imagine slipping into a suit of steel each morning. Every breath, an effort. Every step, a calculated maneuver. In Tudor England, clothing was not merely fabric. It was a rigid shell of status and protection, a wearable fortress that transformed daily dressing into a ritual of endurance. At the very base, a noblewoman donned her shift, a simple linen undergarment washed perhaps once a month. This rare layer was the only piece real enough to meet soap and water. Over it came the bodies, a corset-like structure reinforced with whalebone, wood, or even steel, laced so tightly that breathing deeply became an act of willpower. These bodies flattened the chest and cinched the waist into an unnaturally narrow cone. Many ladies fainted at grand banquets, not from delicate vapors, but from lack of air. One gentlewoman recorded in her diary that she saw stars thrice before her ladies-in-waiting had to loosen the laces. Next was the farthingale, a hoop skirt composed of steel hoops or whalebone ribs, creating a bell or drum shape so wide that gates and doorways required special consideration. Women with farthingales measured half the room, and a single misstep could send them careening into walls or furniture with a muffled thud. Petticoats layered atop the farthingale, each adding weight and stiffness until the entire ensemble felt closer to medieval plate armor than clothing. Many gowns tipped the scales at 20 to 30 pounds. Imagine carrying a small child strapped to your hips all day. Over these foundations, the outer gown, often heavy brocade, velvet, or silk embroidered with gold thread, was draped and pinned in place. Sleeves were detachable, swapped between outfits and stored like prized jewels. They required careful handling. If a sleeve caught a candle flame, the wearer might suffer burns before anyone could unpin the elaborate stitching. A courtier once recounted how a lady's sleeve caught fire at dinner, leaving her face and neck scarred because she could not free herself quickly enough. Gentlemen fared no better. Their doublets were padded and stiffened to exaggerate shoulders and compress waists, creating the illusion of a mighty chest. Hose, or tight-fitting breeches, clung to legs so snugly that any imperfection in the calf was revealed. Some men padded their hose with fabric or carved wooden inserts to craft the desired silhouette. The infamous codpiece began as a practical flap, but evolved into a statement of virility. Stiffened with padding, sometimes jewelled or embroidered, codpieces jutted forward like small sculptures. Henry VIII's codpieces were so pronounced that portraits often focused the viewer's eye there first. Donning and doffing these cumbersome outfits was a performance in itself. A noblewoman might require 3 or 4 attendants to lace up her bodies, adjust her farthingale, and fasten ribbons. Shoes were tied by willing hands, kneeling to reach down unnoticed by peers, as standing to bend forward risked unbalancing the hoops. The physician selected a prominent vein in the crook of the elbow, often palpating to confirm a steady pulse. One swift incision released a dark, frothy stream of blood into a shallow bowl. Elizabeth I, when struck by smallpox in 1562, resisted for days before allowing her physicians to bleed her. They claimed that removing a great quantity of impure blood would draw out poison from the pockmarked flesh. Bloodletting was more than therapy. It was ritual, performed with solemn precision to restore the 4 classical humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile to their supposed harmony. At the heart of this practice was the lancet, a small, sharp blade held by court physicians who believed that too much blood overheated the body, causing fevers, headaches, melancholy, or even plague. During a bloodletting session, the patient royal or noble would recline on a tilted table, arm extended. Yet no one complained. Discomfort was a small price for visibly proclaiming one's rank. After all, wearing 30 pounds of cloth signalled wealth. Only the most privileged could afford the labour and materials. So as you drift toward sleep, picture yourself encased in layers of stiffened cloth, beaten into shape by whalebones and steel hoops. Every breath, every heartbeat echoes against the walls of your personal fortress. With an ulcerated leg that oozed and throbbed after his famous jousting accident in 1536, he believed that draining elsewhere would pull the poison outward. Over his later years, he was bled at least once a month, sometimes bi-weekly, guided by grim-faced physicians. Each session saw him lose pints of blood, until his body, already burdened by obesity and gout, simply could not bear the loss. When the lancet seemed too crude, leeches offered a gentler, though no less invasive, alternative. Hundreds of these slimy worms, each the size of one's finger, were applied to temples, behind ears, and across the chest. The theory held that leeches knew precisely how much blood to consume, slowing their feast once enough humours had departed. In practice, though, leeching often led to persistent bleeding, infection, and unsightly scabs. Nonetheless, leech jars were displayed prominently in royal apothecaries, a testament to their magical reputation. The procedure followed strict etiquette. The patient's arm, wrapped in a linen cloth stained with previous bleedings, was carefully unbound. A servant passed a bowl to catch the blood. With measured detachment, the physician slit the vein not too deep, they cautioned, or the patient might faint from sheer loss. If the flow slowed prematurely, the physician would gently massage the limb to coax further bleeding. Only when the blood ran bright red, rather than the darker, impure hue, would he declare the treatment complete. Noble families kept bleeding schedules like modern appointments. Spring and autumn were deemed the most auspicious seasons for preventative bloodletting, believed to refresh the body's vital essence. Yet patients took pride in them, believing that each drop surrendered brought them closer to perfect balance. As you drift into sleep, picture the dim lamplight flickering over steel and bowls of crimson fluid. Hear the soft hiss as the lancet slices the skin, the distant drip into the bowl. Imagine leeches writhing on pale flesh, each a tiny herald of relief. In the world of Tudor bloodletting, health was found in loss, and life was measured by the calm after the bleeding ceased. Thus, bloodletting stood as a cornerstone of Tudor medicine, a practice that bled bodies to mend them, and that taught a sombre lesson. Sometimes the greatest curative power lay in the life that one willingly let flow away. Strangest hygienic custom number 6. Toxic cosmetics and beauty standards. Using white lead, belladonna, and poisonous hair dyes. As dusk settles over Tudor England, imagine a chamber suffused with the dull glint of candlelight and the heavy scent of vinegar. In that half-lit room, noble women and court beauties gathered around a small table, their faces already strained by the day, preparing to don the most dangerous accessory of all, poisonous cosmetics. This was strangest hygienic custom number 6, where alabaster perfection was bought with lead, and every stroke of paint brought one closer to slow self-poisoning. The ritual began with Venetian ceruse, known to posterity as white lead, mixed with vinegar into a smooth paste. It promised a flawless, death-like pallor that signaled high birth and leisure. Women, sometimes even men, patted the paste onto their faces, necks and décolletage, building layer upon layer until every blemish faded into an eerie, uniform white. In that ghostly mask, skin lines vanished, replaced by a porcelain sheen. Yet beneath the veneer, vicious lead particles seeped through the pores, causing hair to fall in clumps, gums to darken, and teeth to crumble. Many a courtier awoke to raw, burning skin, but still they reapplied the paste, each morning's application inching them closer to lead poisoning. Next came rouge, the fiery counterpoint to the deathly white. Crushed cochineal beetles or red ochre blended with animal fat were tapped sparingly on cheeks and lips, creating bright spots of colour that declared vitality and youth. Some ladies pinched their cheeks raw to produce a natural blush. Others resorted to sulphur lime pastes that burned the skin to a temporary rosy hue, only to scar permanently. With every dab of rouge, the beauty seekers risked painful lesions, infection, and lifelong discoloration. The eyes were not spared. Women prized belladonna, deadly nightshade, drops to dilate the pupils, making their eyes appear larger, darker, more luminous. One drop, and the eyes widened like a startled doe. Multiple drops, and vision blurred. Light stung painfully, and sometimes the user stumbled into walls. Yet many endured weeks of blurry sight in hopes of achieving that hypnotic gaze. The gentlewoman's letter recounts one lady who, after nightly applications, could scarce see her own hand before her face. Yet she persisted, believing that big, dark eyes were the mark of irresistible charm. Hair, too, became a chemical experiment. A vivid red wig, Elizabeth I's signature, demanded a toxic brew of alum, sulphur, quicklime, and even stale urine, left to ferment for days. The concoction was applied with care but burned the scalp, causing hairlines to recede and follicles to die. Many wound-haggard locks around wire frames to mimic the Queen's flame-hued tresses, accepting matted residue and constant itching as the price of high fashion. Brow fashion took its own toll. A high forehead, considered a sign of noble intellect, required women to pluck hairlines backward until only sparse, ghost-light eyebrows remained. Follicles were damaged beyond repair, leaving patches of bare skin where once brows had grown true. Yet to be found with thick, natural eyebrows was to be called coarse, even beastly. So they plucked on. Each tug, a tiny humiliation. Each gap a testament to their devotion to Tudor ideals. Expressing disgust or pity was unthinkable. Makeup was an outward symbol of power. The thicker the circle of white, the more devoted to lineage. The deeper the crimson, the more assured of social standing. Men too painted their faces lightly with ceruse, drew thin brows to heighten aristocratic airs, and sometimes powdered their hair with starch and soot to hide grey strands. In that somnolent palace chamber, brushes dipped into small porcelain pots, fingertips smeared pastes across vulnerable skin, and leeches would pale at the sight of such woe. Yet none dared speak of the hidden price. Slow organ failure, erratic tremors, and agonizing tooth decay. For in Tudor society, to appear young and flawless was worth far more than the fleeting comfort of health. And so, as you drift towards sleep, imagine those hollow-cheeked beauties, brushing lethal pigments onto their faces in the candle's wavering glow. In their porcelain perfection lay a slow poison, a testament to a culture that valued facade above flesh. In Tudor England, beauty was not merely skin-deep, it was a chemical contract with mortality itself. Strangest hygienic custom number 7. Astrology and prophecy, dictating policy, basing decisions on the stars. As twilight drapes the sky over Tudor England, imagine noble councils gathering beneath flickering candlelight while astrologers pore over charts of stars and planets. This is strangest hygienic custom number 7, where matters of state wars, marriages, even medical treatments were entrusted not to earthly wisdom, but to the alignment of celestial bodies and cryptic prophecies. In the hush of a private chamber, the royal astrologer would unroll a parchment star chart, its lines tracing the positions of Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, and the rest. Henry VIII, anxious for divine favour in his campaigns, summoned these scholars to compute the most auspicious moment for departure. A misaligned moon, they warned, might doom the expedition to defeat. A benevolent Mars could ensure victory. Thus, within the War Council, Swords were sharpened only after charts were consulted and planetary hours observed. When it came to marriage alliances, astrology held even greater sway. The king's fourth marriage, for example, was formally approved only after an elaborate horoscope predicted stability between his birth sign and that of his bride. Should Mercury be retrograde, they insisted, diplomats would falter in negotiations and messages would be misinterpreted. So embassy celebrations paused as astrologers recalculated planetary paths, all to avoid diplomatic disaster. 13 years later, Elizabeth I leaned heavily on her own court astrologer, John Dee, a scholar versed in mathematics, occult lore, and prophecy. Before her coronation, he spent weeks casting horoscopes determining that Friday, the 15th of January in 1559, at exactly 11:40 in the forenoon, was supremely favourable. On that precise minute, she was crowned, her rioters of subjects cheering as though the heavens themselves had ordained it. Dee's crystal ball and angelic conversations further guided policy. He claimed to communicate with celestial beings who whispered secrets of foreign plots and local treachery. Reports reached Elizabeth in the dead of night, visions of conspiracies foretold by Mercury's passage through her personal horoscope. Each political crisis thus became intertwined with star charts and séance logs. Ministers awaited daily astrological dispatches as earnestly as they awaited dispatches from the Flemish ambassador. Even medical treatments submitted to the zodiac's authority. A bleeding, for example, was scheduled only when the moon had entered a bleeding-friendly sign, believed to align with the patient's humours. A salve to cure a fever would be prepared when Venus was rising, and herbs harvested under specific stars were thought to wield greater potency. The royal apothecary kept a separate almanac, its pages dog-eared and coffee-stained from nightly consultations. Every siege, treaty, and council session began with a silent prayer to the planets, accompanied by the scratching of quills over parchment star maps. The slightest deviation, a smudge on Mars's symbol, could prompt hours of reading and recalculation before any decision proceeded. Courtiers, already exhausted by the weight of protocol, endured these delays in stoic resignation. Some whispered that the court astrologers enjoyed more real power than the Lord Treasurer, for they held the keys to the kingdom's timetable. This celestial obsession even extended to the mundane. The timing of court dinners depended on Jupiter's ascent. Ambassadors arrived only in favourable houses of the horoscope to avoid ill will. A princess's christening, a knight's knighting, none occurred without first aligning to the rhythm of the heavens. In a land beset by plagues, rebellions, and foreign threats, the belief in cosmic influence offered a semblance of control over unpredictable tides. As your eyelids grow heavy, imagine sitting in that hush, gazing at inverse candles while an astrologer whispers of comets, eclipses, and prophetic verses. Feel the weight of an empire poised on the edge of planetary alignment. In Tudor England, even the most earthly affairs bent beneath the invisible gravity of stars, and every choice, no matter how trivial, was guided by the arcane dance of the heavens. Strangest hygienic custom number 8. Sleep as a spiritual ritual. Segmented sleep and soul, guarding rites. In the hush of Tudor night, when candle flames guttered and corridors lay steeped in velvet gloom, sleep was not merely rest, but a sacred ceremony. This is strangest hygienic custom number 8, where slumber unfolded in two distinct phases, and every moment between was filled with rites designed to shield the sleeper's soul from wandering spirits. First came the first sleep, beginning shortly after dusk, when the body, weary from day-long pageantry and protocol, sank into featherbeds beneath heavy canopies. Curtains were drawn tight, not only to keep out chill drafts but to seal out malevolent forces. Prayers were whispered, holy water sprinkled around the mattress, and iron keys, symbols of protection, were laid in a circle at the headboard. With that, Tudor aristocrats drifted into a gentle, segmented sleep, unaware that their rest had only just begun. After 3 to 4 hours, the household would stir. The first sleep ended, and occupants awoke naturally with the moon riding high. This interval, called the watch, was neither insomnia nor inconvenience, but a hallowed interlude. During the watch, some rose to pray, reciting psalms by the flicker of a single taper. Others engaged in quiet confession to a lady-in-waiting or chaplain, unburdening anxieties lest they manifest as nightmares. A few couples, even royalty, permitted discreet intimacy, believing that union under the watchful eye of night strengthened bonds and warded off evil. More cautious souls tended to the bed itself as if it were an altar. They might circle the mattress thrice, sprinkling salt or carrying a flannel soaked in rosewater to cleanse lingering miasma. A rag tied with blessed parchments could be tucked beneath the pillow, while sprigs of lavender, rue or street, John's wort herbs prized for their protective virtues, were woven into a small dream purse. This talisman was thought to capture benevolent spirits and free the sleeper from malignant visions. It was widely held that what happened in the watch shaped the next phase of sleep. A dream of water signified impending change. A dream of falling warned against treachery. A dream of white horses foretold good health. Should a particularly disturbing vision strike, the sleeper might call for a cunning woman, a local folk healer, to interpret the omen and prescribe charms or prayers. These rituals, though steeped in superstition, served to calm anxious minds before returning to bed. When the hour grew late, often around midnight, courtiers would slip back beneath covers for the second sleep. This repose lasted until the first birdsong heralded dawn. By morning's grey light, the body felt refreshed, and the soul believed itself secure. To rise in daylight without observing these nocturnal rites was to risk vulnerability to both physical illness and spiritual affliction. Even the arrangement of the bedroom reflected these beliefs. Beds were positioned with the sleeper's head to the east, aligning with the rising sun and symbolizing rebirth. Windows featured lattice panels carved with crosses, and bedside tables held small icons or prayer books. Each element was chosen to weave a protective tapestry around the slumberer, ensuring that both body and soul remained tethered to safety. Until well past midnight, servants scurried through dark hallways, lighting small lanterns for those who sought comfort during the watch. The hush was punctuated by the distant drip of oil lamps, the soft murmur of prayers, and the occasional rustle of starched gowns as noblewomen performed their vigil tasks. All the while, the grand tapestry of Tudor superstition held sway, casting sleep as an act of vigilant guardianship against unseen harms. As you drift now toward your own rest, imagine lifting a silken curtain to reveal a canopy bed, the air thick with the scent of dried herbs. Envision the moment of gentle awakening, the hush between sleeps, and the whispered prayers that bind the soul to its earthly coil. In Tudor England, sleep was never mere oblivion. It was an intricate rite, a nightly odyssey to protect both flesh and spirit until dawn's first light. Strangest hygienic custom number 9. Spectacle feasts and performance cuisine, surprise pies, cockentrice, and the towering sugar tree. Imagine a grand banquet hall dimly lit by torchlight, long trestle tables bending under the weight of platters that defy imagination. This is strangest hygienic custom number 9, where food was not simply eaten but staged like a theatrical spectacle, each dish more astonishing than the last, designed to dazzle the senses and reinforce the host's wealth. At the heart of these feasts lay the legendary surprise pie. Baked in advance as a solid crust, often the size of a small barrel, the pie would be presented with great ceremony. Then, as the audience leaned forward, the crust was sliced open to reveal not baked meats, but living creatures, 24 blackbirds, nightingales, or even small songbirds flown in at the last moment before the seal was broken. One noble guest famously swooned, another overturned his wine, and chaos ensued as birds burst forth in a flurry of feathers and startled shrieks. For those Tudor diners, the emotional jolt of surprise proved far more delightful than the actual taste of the birds, which were tough and off-putting but entirely secondary to the shock. Equally bizarre was the cockentrice, a mythical beast engineered by butchers, the front half of a pig sewn to the rear half of a capon. After hours of skilled butchery and hidden supports, the creature was roasted until golden, then presented as if it had walked from a fairy tale. Guests marveled at the grotesque yet fascinating sight. A pig's snout with a chicken's tail, its skin crisped and its limbs trussed, served alongside elaborate garnishes. Sliced with silver knives, the cockentrice proved to be a poor eater's fare, dry, greasy, and strangely chewy. But its real purpose lay in spectacle, not sustenance. Above all else soared the sugar tree, a confectioner's pinnacle. Carved from blocks of refined sugar and moulded into the shape of a lavish tree, complete with leaves, fruits, and even small animals, it might reach a height of 6 feet or more. Candied almonds hung like fruit, while spun sugar tendrils mimicked vines. At its base, marzipan flowers and crystallized violets offered delicate nibbling. To partake was to chip off slivers of wealth itself, sugar being rarer than spices and more treasured than gold in Tudor England. Guests nibbled sugary blossoms as they speculated on court gossip, their tongues sticky and their teeth already threatened by cavity from indulgence. Throughout the evening, courtiers chewed cloves or anise seeds to mask foul tastes and stalls of candied flowers, and sugared almonds were passed about by liveried servants. Towering subtleties, miniature castles, dragons or galleons sculpted from sugar paste dotted the table, disappearing as quickly as they were admired. Every guest vied to be seen consuming the most extravagant delicacy, for to decline was to appear poor or impolite. Beneath the glittering chandeliers, the aroma of roasting swan mixed with pungent perfume, masking the less appetizing reality of the meat, which was often overcooked and tough. Wild swans belonged to the crown, so eating one was a bold statement of privilege. Similarly, peacock was roasted, then redressed in its own feathers before being paraded in on a silver platter. Applause echoed through the hall as the host demonstrated mastery over nature and resources. Yet these feasts, opulent as they were, had a darker undertone. The extravagance underscored the vast divide between nobles, drowning in sugar and spice, and commoners who subsisted on pottage and stale bread. The spectacle of eating live birds or sewing animals together served as both entertainment and a reminder of power. A visceral display that said, "I possess resources beyond measure, and I wield them at will." As your eyes grow heavy, picture the final moment when the sugar tree was ceremonially felled, its branches passed around as souvenirs. Imagine the lingering stickiness on your fingers, the clatter of silver goblets, and the hush that fell over the hall as the host rose to thank the guests. In Tudor England, a meal was rarely about nourishment. It was a performance, a grand illusion, a baroque ritual reminding all who partook that power and wealth could be eaten, displayed, and consumed like the finest of confections. Strangest hygienic custom number 10. Fear of poison and royal rituals. The royal taster and unicorn horn amulets. In the dim corridors of Tudor palaces, every goblet of wine and morsel of meat carried the shadow of suspicion. This was strangest hygienic custom number 10, where the spectre of poison loomed larger than any foreign foe, and the defences against it took on almost mystical proportions. At the heart of this paranoia stood the royal taster, a court official whose life balanced on the edge of a teaspoon. Before the monarch touched a slice of bread or raised a beaker of spiced ale, the taster would sample the fare. If he trembled or fell ill, the dish was discarded, and an investigation quietly commenced. Each morning the taster received his meal in a private antechamber, under the watchful eyes of chamberlains and guards. After he ate, a silent pause fell, if he survived unscathed. Only then was the food carried in for the king or queen. This grim ritual lent the taster unparalleled proximity to the sovereign, but also placed him perpetually on death's doorstep. For those not bold enough to risk sampling royal fare, there existed a suite of unicorn horn amulets curved, ivory spikes believed to detect or neutralize poison. Nobles prized these relics above all, for genuine unicorn horn was rarer than the finest silks. In reality, they were often narwhal tusk or rhinoceros horn, carved into files and illuminated by candlelight. A single fragment might sit beside the royal chalice, its surface purported to bubble or change hue at the faintest taint of arsenic. Kings and queens kept these horns on velvet cushions at their place at table, tapping them gently before drinking as if invoking a séance to ward off hidden peril. Even after the taster had deemed a dish safe, courtiers still sought protection. Small bezoar stones, sometimes accompanied by unicorn horn dust, were ground into powders and mixed with wine as a prophylactic. Physicians claimed that these concoctions formed a protective barrier within the stomach, neutralizing toxins before they could spread. Each courtier carried a tiny leather pouch of bezoar and horn dust as everyday jewelry, slipping a pinch into each glass. Royal kitchens were locked down as if under siege. Only the most trusted cooks, often foreign-born to dissuade local intrigue, were permitted near the monarch's food. Ingredients were vetted individually, spices weighed and recorded, and wells supplying cooking water were sealed. Visitors watched from a respectful distance as chefs prepared meals under armed guard, the distant clang of armor echoing through the stone corridors. Yet no measure felt complete without ritual. Before a state banquet, a solemn procession placed a single unicorn horn on a silver dish at the head of the table. priests might sprinkle holy water around the platter, chanting psalms to imbue the horn with divine protection. Some courtiers even slept with small horn talismans under their pillows, convinced that dreams tainted by poison-laced breezes would be neutralized by the horn's silent vigil. Legends grew around these practices. One whispered tale tells of a French ambassador who presented the queen with a pair of perfumed gloves. She refused to don them until they were tested upon a condemned prisoner. Another grim taster whose survival earned the gloves a cautious nod before passing them to the sovereign. Another story describes a royal feast where a visible film formed on the unicorn horn, prompting a hasty change of goblets mid-dinner. The hall fell into silence until the monarch laughed and declared, "Let no poison outwit our faith." All the while, courtiers studied their ungainly amulets, tracing the spiral carvings on narwhal tusk and pretending to sense their magic. Beneath the ornate finials and tarnished metal lay the same fear, that a bite, a drop, a single grain of poison could snuff out a reign overnight. As your eyes grow heavy, imagine the hush that fell before the taster raised a spoon to his lips, the gleam of ivory horns on polished oak tables, and the soft mutter of prayers as goblets chimed. In Tudor England, trust was served on a platter of ritual and relics, and every meal became a test of survival. The fear of poison transformed dining into a ritual of vigilance, where life itself depended on the silent power of unicorn horn and the courage of a human shield known as the royal taster. Strangest hygienic custom number 11. Royal beasts and court rituals. Lapdogs, monkeys, parrots, ravens, and bees in the palace. As midnight's hush settles over Tudor corridors, the palace stirs not only with servants but with creatures deemed fit for a monarch's favour. This is strangest hygienic custom number 11, where animals from pampered lapdogs to ominous ravens served as symbols of status, omens, and indispensable court companions. First among these were the lapdogs, tiny spaniels and terriers that nestled in noble women's skirts like living jewels. Court ladies carried them close, tucking them beneath arms during ceremonies. But these miniature hounds were seldom house-trained. Their most memorable contribution to court life was the occasional, discreet accident upon velvet gowns or polished floorboards, prompting hurried whispers and even more hurried cleaning. Yet to be seen with a pampered pup was a mark of privilege. Only the wealthiest could afford such an accessory, despite the faint odour and constant risk of stained brocade. Monkey attendants took flamboyance to new heights. Imported at great expense from Africa and Asia, these small primates wore miniature jackets and caps, paraded on silver collars, and even had their own footmen whose sole duty was to provide fresh fruit and to scoop up their mess. Monkeys lounged upon velvet cushions in the Queen's chambers, plucking at hairpins or chattering at visitors. On occasion, a monkey would lash out snatching a goblet or delivering a nip to an inattentive footman's ear, only to be transferred to another noble's care, never punished beyond a stern glance at its handler. Parrots, with their bright plumage and uncanny mimicry, perched upon gilded stands in council chambers. A well-trained parrot that squawked, "God save the Queen," at precisely the wrong moment, could send ambassadors into embarrassed silence. Yet Elizabeth I prized these talking birds, believing that their spontaneous utterances carried messages from beyond. Court jesters even composed poems imagining that a parrot's caw might foretell political intrigue, urging courtiers to heed their feathered companions' cryptic squawks. Ravens, perhaps the most enigmatic of court beasts, were both revered and feared. At the Tower of London, the belief held that the kingdom's fate hinged on the continued presence of the ravens. Each bird wore tiny leather jesses and was fed from the royal kitchen. Legend declared that if the ravens ever abandoned the tower, England would fall. Raven keepers patrolled the battlements at dawn, signalling relief when each bird hopped onto its designated perch, an unspoken oath between bird and realm. Even humble bees found a sacred place. Elizabethan apiarists whispered the death of a household member to the hives in a ritual called telling the bees, draping black ribbons over the hives and murmuring farewells so the insects would not desert their home in grief. Failure to perform this rite risked the hives dying or absconding, which in turn threatened the royal tables with shortages of honey and wax. Beeswax candles were then doubly prized, believed to burn with divine purity during midnight masses in the Queen's private chapel. These royal animals formed a living tapestry of Tudor superstition and spectacle. A lapdog's yelp could signal the approach of an unbidden guest. A parrot's mimicry might lighten the mood during tense negotiations. A raven's croak atop stone ramparts reminded all of looming omens. Bees, in their industrious hum, offered sweet consolation and spiritual metaphor. To care for such creatures required teams of attendants, groomers for spaniels, monkey keepers with special nets, parrot trainers versed in arcane languages, raven herders with trumpets to call strays home, and bee whisperers armed with smoke buckets to calm the hives. Each attendant held a recognized court office, and their mastery over these animals brought them favor, influence, and generous stipends. As you sink into slumber, imagine the palace alive with soft paw steps, chittering primate voices, the echo of clipped parrot calls, the solemn croak of a raven, and the distant buzz of a hive. In Tudor England, animals were not mere pets. They were living talismans, political instruments, and silent counselors within the labyrinth of palace intrigue. Here, every creature had its role, and mastery over them was as vital as mastery over courtly manners themselves. Strangest hygienic custom number 12. Late-night music and musical exorcism, lullabies to sleep and chasing away evil. As the hour grows late and the last embers in the hearth glow dim, the hush of a Tudor night palace is broken by soft strains of melody. This is strangest hygienic custom number 12, when music became a shield against darkness, a lullaby to soothe the body, and an incantation to ward off unseen terrors lurking beyond flickering candlelight. In stately chambers, a small ensemble composed of a fiddler, a harpist, and a gentlewoman trained in the sprightly art of the virginals assembled at dusk. They carried instruments wrapped in velvet, their presence announced by muted footfalls and the rustle of silk. Their task was twofold: to ease the sovereign and court ladies into slumber, and to repel the miasma of malevolent spirits said to roam the silent corridors. The program began with a soft pavane, its slow, measured steps echoed by the harp's gentle plucking. Each note unfolded like a whispered prayer, coaxing anxious minds to release the day's burdens. The fiddler's bow moved in languid arcs, drawing melancholy harmonies that mingled with the crackle of dying logs. As the music drifted through the heavy tapestries, it carried away the residue of court intrigues, palatable only as fading echoes. Next came a set of lullabies, handed down through generations of Tudor children's nurses and chambermaids. Sung in hushed soprano voices, these melodies invoked saints' names and blessed imagery: sleep, gentle soul, beneath street, Clare's eye. They would murmur each refrain, reinforcing the idea that divine protection accompanied every note. Courtiers believed that a lullaby, softly murmured at bedside, would soothe the spirits of the departed and hush the cries of wraiths that might disturb mortal rest. Between lullabies, the ensemble performed chimes on small handbells, each crystalline tone designed to break the silence like a purifying shower of sound. According to custom, these delicate chimes created a sonic barrier, sealing the threshold between the waking world and the realm of nightmares. Even the Queen's trusted physician might nod in approval at the pealing bells, confident that they dispersed harmful vapors and set the humours at ease, an early attempt at curing midnight fevers through art rather than alembic. During the final segment, known as the exorcism prelude, the musicians shifted into a brisker tempo. Here, notes darted like sparks, rhythms sprang like startled deer, and the virginalist's fingers danced fleetly across the keyboard. This lively interlude, though still played softly, was believed to chase away lingering bad dreams or residual omens of ill fortune. A chamberlain once recorded that after one such prelude, a courtesan swore she felt a chill lift from her bones, a sensation she attributed to the triumph of melody over malice. All the while, a small group of chambermaids stood at the bed's foot, their own voices raised in unison to recite brief psalms between songs. Their whispered prayers intertwined with each bar of music, reinforcing the ritual's dual nature: artful repose and spiritual safeguard. If a stray mouse or a creaking floorboard threatened to startle weary sleepers, the music flowed on uninterrupted, a comforting mantra that no mortal or phantom could breach. When the final chord faded and the candles guttered low, the ensemble slipped away behind heavy curtains, their instruments stowed and their footsteps swallowed by carpets. In that quiet void, courtiers would breathe deeply, assured that music had not only lulled them into rest, but had banished every spectre that might have haunted their dreams. So as you drift toward your own sleep, imagine the soft tremor of strings, the gentle lull of harp, and the crystalline chime of handbells echoing in the velvety dark. Picture fingers dancing lightly over virginal keys and voices, leaning close to whisper saints' names. In Tudor England, even the most simple act of going to bed became a sacred ceremony, in which melody served as both balm for the body and bulwark for the soul. Strangest hygienic custom number 13, the royal touch ceremony and healing by power, touching to cure the king's evil. As the hush of dawn softens the shadows in Tudor chapels, humble petitioners gather in solemn lines, hope shimmering like candle smoke in their eyes. This is strangest hygienic custom number 13, where the monarch's hand, not medicine, is believed to hold miraculous healing power. Known as the royal touch, this ritual transformed sickness into spectacle and reshaped the boundary between ruler and subject. Each autumn and spring, when court schedules allowed, the king or queen would sit upon a raised dais in the palace chapel, robed in rich fabrics and glittering jewels. A small group of courtiers formed a respectful circle around the sovereign, while priests stood by to recite prayers. Patients, often afflicted with a condition known as scrofula, a swollen, suppurating inflammation of the lymph nodes, approached one by one, guided by attendants. Their hope that the monarch's touch would dispel their malady entirely. The ceremony began with a soft tolling of bells and the murmur of psalms. The monarch, having prepared through confession and fasting, raised a jeweled hand, usually the right, and laid it upon the afflicted person's shoulder or head. Attendants placed a golden coin, called the angel, into the patient's hand, its image of Saint Michael slaying a dragon serving as a token of divine favour. The patient then retired, clutching the coin, convinced that the sovereign's grace had imbued it with curative power. Physicians observing the ritual made no public objection, for even they recognized the ceremony's deep cultural resonance. In an age when empirical cures were scant and suffering widespread, the royal touch offered solace when remedies failed. A learned doctor once wrote that after receiving the touch, many patients reported reduced pain and swelling within days, though he conceded that the mind's faith might be the true agent of recovery. Elizabeth I, though cautious in other matters, embraced the royal touch with fervour. She touched thousands during her reign, her slender fingers brushing the faces of the desperate. She reportedly kept a ledger, meticulously noting the names of those healed, the dates of their visits, and the number of angels distributed. Each entry reinforced her image not only as a sovereign, but as a divine intermediary bridging heaven and earth. Beyond scrofula, courtiers whispered that the royal touch could aid fainting spells, chronic fevers, and even melancholy spirits. A nobleman, suffering recurrent bouts of dizziness, travelled days to kneel before the queen, emerging pale yet resolute, convinced that her acceptance of his plea would grant him strength. Word spread of such recoveries, and the chapel's waiting rooms grew crowded with hopeful souls. Coins bearing the royal effigy and saintly imagery soon became talismans, passed down through families and treasured as heirlooms. They were thought to maintain residual power long after the ceremony, their metal surface still warm with the monarch's touch. Some even affixed these coins to amulets worn around the neck, ensuring that healing influence remained close at hand. The ritual, however, bore its own risks. Should a sovereign fall ill or pass away, the perceived efficacy of the royal touch waned, and coins associated with the late monarch lost luster. Moreover, skeptics warned that relying on ceremony above medicine could lead to neglect of proper care. Yet few dared voice such criticisms within the hushed walls of the palace chapel. Imagine, then, standing in that vaulted space, candlelight flickering upon ornate carvings, the faint scent of incense drifting through the air. You kneel before the monarch, heart pounding, hope and dread entwined, as that single royal hand descends. In that moment, all the aches and fevers of your body hinge upon a touch, an invisible transfer of grace, power, and perhaps a fragment of the divine. So as the last notes of the chapel organ fade, and you drift towards sleep, recall the power of a simple gesture, repeated through centuries, the sovereign's touch, a blending of faith and authority, ritual and relief. In Tudor England, healing was not only a matter of bloodletting or poultices, It was a ceremony woven from gold coins, whispered prayers, and the delicate press of royalty's hand upon the fevered brow. Strangest hygienic custom number 14. Seeds of rebellion and underground communication. Ciphers, invisible letters, secret tunnels. In the stillness of Tudor corridors, beneath the surface of courtly deference, lay whispers of dissent carried through hidden channels. This is strangest hygienic custom number 14, where conspirators wove coded missives into everyday objects, inked invisible letters beneath royal proclamations, and excavated secret tunnels to pass intelligence without fear of discovery. At first glance, a noble's letter appeared a model of elegant penmanship, sealed with wax bearing the family crest. Yet skilled eyes could detect the faint bleeds of a cipher embedded within. A simple substitution code, where every fifth word was the true message, allowed messages to slip unnoticed past censors. Scribes trained under moonlight applied this technique, then washed over the page with a thin glaze of diluted vinegar, rendering the hidden words invisible until a subtle heat revealed the treasonous content. Courtiers used invisible ink, crafted from plant sap or diluted alum. During the day, letters looked innocuous reports on land holdings, petitions for favor. But at night, recipients held parchments close to a candle flame, and ghostly ink began to darken, exposing instructions for uprisings or pleas to foreign powers. One smuggled note read, "Gather at dawn by the west wall. 60 men wait mine signal." Had the king's spies intercepted it unread, the conspiracy might yet have festered. More daring still were the secret tunnels carved beneath stately homes and palace gardens. Under cover of darkness, masons and disgruntled labourers chipped through stone foundations, creating narrow passages linking the privy chambers to the outer walls. Courtiers fearful of arrest could slip unseen through these subterranean veins, emerging beyond the moat to flee abroad, or regroup with fellow conspirators. Maps of these tunnels were hidden in coded drawing rolls, disguised as innocuous floor plans or garden layouts. Even everyday objects served as vessels of covert messaging. A silver pomander, intended to mask rank odors, might contain a tiny hollow compartment. Inside lay a parchment strip folded around a pin, bearing coordinates for a clandestine meeting in the marshlands outside London. When authorities searched for forbidden plots, they overlooked these scented trinkets resting on velvet cushions. Whisper networks thrived in palace shadows. Sign language passed through hand gestures during court masks. A flick of the wrist under a silk sleeve signaled an important letter awaiting. A tap on the elbow indicated danger in the next corridor. Attendants and pages memorized dozens of such signs, relaying messages faster than any runner could sprint. Even the bows and curtsies had nuanced variations, each a syllable in an unspoken dialect. In remote manners, coded embroidery decorated table linens. At first sight, the geometric patterns resembled popular Tudor motifs, stylized flowers, fleur-de-lis, or heraldic beasts. Yet an astute observer recognized that the number of petals or the orientation of a leaf corresponded to letters in a secret alphabet. Over dinner, a hostess might pass a napkin to a trusted guest. Beneath its folds lay precise instructions for rallying support or smuggling goods. To detect these schemes, the Crown employed cipher breakers learned mathematicians who pored over intercepted letters, looking for frequency patterns or repeated phrases. They used early forms of frequency analysis, tallying letter occurrences by candlelight. Still, for every code cracked, conspirators devised new encryptions, mixing Latin dead languages with archaic runes, ensuring the game of cat and mouse continued. Imagine slipping through a moonlit tunnel, letter clenched in hand, heart pounding as you emerge into a hidden courtyard, or sitting in the Queen's presence, surreptitiously offering a curved finger sign beneath a bejeweled glove. In Tudor England, loyalty could be covertly pledged through silent rituals, and rebellion was often a matter of silent script hidden in plain sight. As you drift towards sleep, picture the delicate glow of a warm blade revealing secret text, hear the steady drip of water in a narrow passage, and sense the thrill of secrets exchanged beneath vaulted ceilings. In that world of perfumed intrigue and gilded danger, the most potent weapon was not a sword or a spell, but a single word, invisibly inked, carried through hidden tunnels, shaping history with its silent power. Strangest hygienic custom number 15. Courtly fears and bizarre legacies. charms, funeral rites, and Saved by the Bell. As a hush falls over the ancient halls and candlelight trembles on stone walls, the Tudor court confronted terrors both mortal and unseen. This is strangest hygienic custom number 15, where protective charms, elaborate funeral rituals, and even the origin of Saved by the Bell wove together into a tapestry of superstitious dread and uncanny legacy. Each noble household employed a cadre of charm makers, cunning women or learned apothecaries who crafted small pouches of herbs, written prayers on scraps of parchment, and carved protective symbols into wood or bone. These talismans were worn close to the skin or affixed to door frames. Lavender and Street John's wort drove away malevolent spirits, crushed rosemary, and rue repelled plague. A courtier slipping such a charm beneath his doublet felt a fragile shield against curses, witchcraft, and lurking disease. When death approached, the court's funeral rites became a solemn spectacle. Once a noble lay ill beyond hope, their bedchamber was sealed and adorned with candles burning at each corner, symbolic beacons to guide the departing soul. Courtiers recited prayers at intervals, while a priest moved among them, sprinkling holy water and chanting liturgical verses in Latin. The body was washed with water, infused with rosemary and wine, believed to cleanse both flesh and spirit before the soul's journey. A wake followed, often lasting 3 nights. Family and friends kept vigil around the corpse, seated upon rush-strewn floors. They murmured the office of the dead, a series of psalms meant to ease the transition to the next realm. Yet vigil also carried a shuddering fear that the recently deceased might not remain so. In a world before modern medicine, tales circulated of those mistakenly buried alive. To guard against this horror, many families adopted a morbid custom, the safety coffin. A length of cord tied to the deceased's hand ran through a hole in the coffin lid to a bell above ground. Should the sleeper below awaken, asphyxiated but conscious, the slightest movement would tug the cord and toll the bell-summoning attendants to rescue the living from premature burial. Thus was born the phrase, "Saved by the Bell," a testament to the fear that death might be a temporary condition deeper than the stone-lined grave. On the day of interment, the cortege processed through tapestry-lined corridors and over cobbled courtyards, the body draped in grave whites and the face partially veiled. Mourners carried funeral posies, small bouquets of rosemary, rue and violets to mask the stench of decay. Each guest wore a sprig pinned to the breast, a floral apology for the odours they would soon confront. At the churchyard's edge, a final prayer was uttered, the safety coffin's bell tested one last time, and the body was lowered amid solemn tolls of the great bell. After burial, the post-burial rituals continued. For 40 days, memorial masses were said, candles burned at the family altar, and the household avoided lighting fires in the deceased's chamber, lest the lingering spirit be disturbed. On the 40th day, a small feast marked the end of formal mourning, though whispers of restless souls persisted among servants who claimed to glimpse pale figures drifting through moonlit galleries. Even years later, the deceased's legacy haunted the court. Families preserved safety coffin bells as heirlooms, believing their tolling might one day protect a future ancestor. Charms once worn by the dead were passed down, their original potency thought to linger in stitched seams or carved notches. And, Saved by the Bell, entered common speech, a reminder that the boundary between life and death could be unravelled by a single peal. Now, as your eyelids grow heavy, imagine candles flickering in a vaulted chapel, the soft jangle of a buried bell, and the faint rustle of lavender sachets pressed to weary brows. Picture solemn prayers echoing through stone corridors, the cautious step of a chamberlain listening for a distant toll. In Tudor England, fear of death and the unknown inspired rituals of profound strangeness, and even a reassuring phrase that survives to this day, echoing in every saved soul's memory. And that has been the journey through 15 strange customs of the Tudor court, from royal backside wiping to the safety charm in the coffin. Now, as night has fully fallen, we gently slow the pace of our tale, casting aside those lavish and sometimes chilling images to make room for a tranquil space where the soul may rest. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and let each breath guide you back to a warm chamber where candlelight softly dances upon ancient stone walls. You might hear the distant piano echoing from a Tudor banquet hall, its gentle keys caressing each thread of emotion lulling you into a land of dreams. Those 15 rituals, superstitions, and extravagant costumes, strange and shiver-inducing, though they were sprang from a single deep-seated fear, the fear of the uncontrollable. Yet today, whether through technology or faith, human nature still seeks ways to protect itself from countless dangers. The true magic lies not in charms or tolling bells, but in our own resilience, clarity, and belief in ourselves. Now, in this silent moment, allow the sound of the pen and the breath of history to fade away, making room for pure serenity. Feel your heartbeat slow, each thought spreading a gentle sense of peace. Let go of all worries, be they of royal toilets, poisonous miasma, or ambitious secret tunnels in this final exhalation of the day. Before we part, open your heart to the deeper meaning of our story. Power and ambition may drive people to the most bizarre acts, but fear and superstition are merely mirrors, reflecting our desire to survive and be loved. When we cast off the trappings of ritual, remember that true strength lies in the courage to face our fears, and compassion alone can heal the invisible wounds. And now, as your fingers relax and your mind drifts toward rest, let your spirit drift gently into sleep. I wish you a deep, peaceful night, filled with gentle dreams free of all anxiety. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss our newest and most enchanting videos. Sleep well.